Since opening in 1985, Les Misérables has become something of an institution here in the West End. Not only is it the world's longest running musical, it's been seen by more than 60 million people in 42 countries and in 21 different languages.
If somebody had told you that way back when, would you have believed it?
I'd have laughed. Absolutely no way.
You say you knew you were working on something good though.
Yes, I loved it, but there was no way that anyone can imagine something running this long. It's crazy, isn't it? And it's probably going to it'll probably outlive me.
I think it's one of the great stories of the triumph of the human spirit, and it's got, because it's got so many characters, it's got so many ways in. You know, you've got the story of Valjean, which involves the discovery of virtue and the discovery of faith, the discovery of love for a child, and what it's like to be a parent, what it's like to let a child go out into the world. Then you've got the kind of more teenage, love triangle story, the story of unrequited love with Eponine. Kids will, enjoy Gavroche and Little Cosette stories, and any obsessive policeman could enjoy Javert.
Jean Valjean's crime was stealing a loaf of bread. It was the beginning of a lifelong confrontation.
Les Mis, miraculously, is the longest running musical in the world, and I'm as surprised as anybody. I always thought it was a very terrific musical, but I never had any thought that a show of such a serious note would actually run as long. But it seems to touch every generation, everywhere in the world. I mean, Victor Hugo's story, is about contemporary people, even though it's set in a period setting. And every country in the world seems to react to it. And of course, Alain Boublil and Claude Michel Schoenberg's music, those songs are absolutely fantastic. And they're timeless, and it speaks to an audience of any age.
Let's not forget, though, that Victor Hugo was already an international celebrity by the time he got to age 30. He was known as the Prince of Poets and was, shall we say, massive within the Romantic movement. More importantly, of course, he was what you would, I suppose, assume today, just a huge celebrity, end of. Who would have thought, though, that so many years later, his name would still be synonymous, really, with the world of musical theatre, not just really in his home country, or even indeed in Britain, but worldwide.
Take him off.
A duel of wills with the fanatic police inspector, Javert.
Continue.
The hope of escape was his only reason for living.
Hold, or I'll shoot!
It is the decision of the military tribunal that 5 years be added to your sentence.
You must have been asked many times, but can you in any way put your finger on what it is that has made it the longest running show ever?
Well, I personally think it's the story.
Victor Hugo's masterpiece, Les Misérables.
You mustn't cry. You must be very brave.
With all the power and spectacle of those turbulent years leading to the French Revolution, it is a story of incredible courage and relentless pursuit.
Join up!
An exciting panorama that captures the spirit of a rebellious generation.
It's the most interesting universal story, and it touches everybody. And I remember watching some of the scenes that I wasn't in way back before it went on, during rehearsals, and I was sobbing my heart out. And then I thought, oh my God, it's my scene coming up next, and I had to pull myself together. I mean, this show, it makes men cry, put it that way.
It's a beautiful story. I mean, whether you're into musicals or not, it's one of the great stories ever told.
The crowning point, really, for Victor Hugo's masterpiece, Les Misérables, really started way back in June 1832. He was sat in a park, relaxing, heard a rather strange noise at first, found out that it was gunfire, which then led him into the June Revolution, which of course then formed the basis of possibly his best and most famous idea.
You, join us today. Together we will lay our hand on the sword hilt of God and shout, down with the Bourbons, down with the monarchy.
It was the first lesson I learnt, is that it doesn't matter how good the songs are, if the book isn't really strong and that the songs don't grow out of the book, you don't have a good musical.
Victor's first full-length novel was one that we know by a better title now, but when it first came out it was known as Notre de Paris, which then in turn became, of course, more famous as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, being remade so many times, most famously, of course, by Hollywood in the late 30s with Charles Lawton. But that really did open many doors for Victor, and he became even more celebrated, if that were possible. Now, just to put this in sort of a bracket, if you like, Paris and France in particular were already in the grip of something rather dramatic themselves. There'd been a massive outbreak of cholera, with over 19,000 Parisians dying. Now, some people thought that this was really set up by the government as one of those mad theories, you know, because they were trying to poison off, for want of a better word, some of the lesser desirable residents of Parisian society, the underdogs. And this, of course, then fascinated Hugo himself, giving him even more spark to an already dramatic story. Now, not many people will know that Victor Hugo wrote Les Misérables in his long years of exile in the Channel Islands, and to get inspiration for this, he would write naked at his desk every day, shocking some people who would actually turn up to take tea with him and things like that. I think what's interesting to note as well, he didn't really rush this particular masterpiece. He went through many, many different rewrites, and for a while it sat around by himself. You know, he changed plot, decided to pick it up, go back to it again. He was known as a perfectionist, and I think, of course, like anybody who'd enjoyed huge success, it would be like today releasing a Bond movie. You know, everybody's going to criticise, everybody's going to say whether they like it or not, and he was under immense pressure to make sure what he came up with next was, of course, an international smash. And, of course, when it first came out, that wasn't necessarily the case. Victor Hugo's Les Misérables really was the most anticipated publication in years, and New York society was agag waiting to know how it would be done. And to give you just an insight, really, as to how even back then they were very clever, they decided to mount this massive PR campaign. And so they would drop in little teasers, rather like what they do, say, with a Harry Potter movie in today's decade. So they just drop a little bit in, and then they came up with the first sort of take, the second take, and by the time, of course, that the final volume was released, it was a momentum. Everybody wanted a copy. Everybody needed to be seen with a copy of their book. It was the coffee table equivalent of gold dust, if you like. And once again, of course, he was looking at a mega smash hit.
Cameron Mackintosh was sent a demo tape based on Victor Hugo's novel Les Misérables. The two French composers, Claude Michel Schoenberg and Alain Boublil, worked closely with him, developing the score.
We never go ahead with anything unless all three of us absolutely agree on every step of the way.
I think that whole
but I cannot do it without the first part.
Oh, because you can do
It's like a safety brake, that if two like something and the other doesn't, it means that actually we haven't got the right solution, and we then carry on until we find a third solution.
When Victor Hugo passed away in May 1885, he was considered a national hero. Over 2 million people mourned at his funeral. But this is the interesting thing. The theme, of course, throughout Les Misérables is all about social injustice, and he'd requested that he wanted a pauper's funeral. Sadly, though, for him, that wish was not carried out, and he became, if possible, an even bigger cultural, literally, and of course, celebrity icon.
When I first heard it was called Les Misérables, I thought, so I don't know if that name's going to work. And so we called it the Glums. And now, you know, Les Misérables is the name that everybody knows worldwide. And even if you don't speak French, you know the name.
Since the publication of Les Misérables, there's been no less than 48 operatic versions. But the version really that we know and love today actually started out way back in 1980 as just a simple concept album.
Can you not actually get that with a slightly different rhythm? Because that's got the menace that you're talking about. I think a producer shouldn't write for writers. I don't think directors should do that.
The writers and lyricists of the wonderful concept album were allegedly inspired by another British phenomenon, that of Lionel Bart's Oliver, the record-breaking musical. Apparently they were sat down watching it in a theatre and particularly taking interest in the Artful Dodger. And as they were watching Oliver unfold on stage, they decided how they could almost see Les Misérables taking shape in their own musical opera themselves, simply by just watching Oliver. Now, who would have thought that a simple project like Lionel Bart's Oliver, which also had its own problems, just like Les Misérables, would explode from just an afternoon matinee?
We are there to complement the writer's imagination and to bring that writing to its best fruition. What I'm very good at is saying, this bit's dull, this song does not sort of come to a proper climax. And I'm just fascinated about how the writing develops, and how that you take a basically good story and you make sure that the graph of emotion throughout the evening is hit exactly right.
3 months after the concept album had topped the charts in France, someone decided to take the rather risky venture of taking it to the stage. Once again, the critics were less than nice about this particular new musical, but word of mouth took off once again, making the 3-month run a sellout. Of course, by this point, other people were taking notice, not just in France, but around the world.
That's the thing that I always aim for my productions, that once the audience settles down, the first thing you've got to do is in the first 5 minutes is to tell them the language of the evening that you're going to use.
Way back in 1980, the first original concept album of Les Mis was released. It topped the charts without really much promotion, and 3 months later they decided to stage the very first musical version based on the concept album. This just broke box office records, with over 1 million plus people wanting to see the production. Then, of course, this was brought to the attention of who we know now to be the super producer, none other than our very own Cameron Mackintosh. But it would take him quite some time before he could turn it into the British phenomenon that we know and love and take it around the world. But when he first heard the concept album, he thought there could be something in it. Of course, he had no idea, just that something would make him very, very rich indeed.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, whoa!
I knew from the beginning I wanted to do the singing live, and I was so passionate about it, I wasn't willing to make the film unless I could do the singing live. And this is because I always find singing to playback, to lip syncing to pre-record, however well it's done, has an artifice. At its worst, it makes you embarrassed. At the best, you have to just forgive it. And in a light or a comedic film, it's easier to forgive. But I wanted there to be no barrier between the audience and the experience of his emotions. In terms of how it was made, it was a truly British production. The internationalism was, really in the cast. Was I one of the best people in the world who would do this? That doesn't mean the British are the best singers, but I needed to look a little further afield.
I think what's personally interesting to take note of is the fact that when this show launched in October 1985, nobody really could have foreseen just how big it was going to be. And the critics, as I say, loathed it and were rather cruel, in fact. Not really just about the length of the musical, the fact that they were getting a free ticket and the fact that, they had to sit and endure it. But they didn't really understand, even when it started to take off and become a huge box office phenomenon, they couldn't understand why the public liked it.
The posh papers said that we had trivialized one of the greatest works of Western literature. The tabloids agreed between themselves that we had perpetrated a gloomy, dull, endless evening, which wasn't what musicals were about at all. Musicals should be light and frothy and frivolous evenings that sent everybody away happy and humming the tunes.
It took 2 years for Cameron Mackintosh and his team to make the English language version of what we know as Les Misérables today. But in October 1985, it opened at the less than glamorous location off West End in the Barbican.
Although his father is Scottish, Mackintosh himself was brought up in the home counties. His mother is Maltese, and his parents met in Ensa during the war.
When he was young, he was always standing on chairs with a stick in his hand, as if he had a great orchestra in front of him. And I thought he was going to be a sort of bandmaster, band leader or something like that. Then he started with a puppet show.
I know a lot of people do puppet shows, but they don't normally drive the family entirely batty all year.
The first thing he used to tell us, if you're late, you won't come in. So I say, well, if we don't come in, you'll have no audience. He said, never mind, every show you must be on time.
I just finished playing a performance, a matinee performance of Salad Days, and the stage doorkeeper came to my dressing room and said, excuse me, sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a lady at the stage door with a little boy, and she says that he absolutely insists upon seeing you. So in you came, Cameron, and was it your aunt that was with you, I think?
It was my aunt, my mother, and my kilt.
Yes, I remember your kilt very well.
And Julian, instead of sort of patting me on the head and giving me some candy floss, actually took me terribly seriously and showed me backstage of how he mimed with Minnie the Magic Piano from the Pit and how the flying saucer worked and was attached to wires. And I just remember sitting on this stage, or standing on this stage, looking around and thinking, yes, I'd like to do this when I grow up. My nickname at school was Darryl F. Mackintosh, after Darryl Zanuck, who was having lots of successful films then. And again, I used to start the first day of the autumn term preparing for the Christmas review. If people booked in advance, they could get the tickets for £1, and if they got them nearer the date, they had to pay 2 shillings. I was like a hoover. I sucked up any information about the theatre. I got magazines from America, from every newspaper and article I could about anything about the theatre. So I was a sort of walking encyclopedia at school and drove everybody mad who were much more interested in the football results.
When he left school, Cameron Mackintosh decided to try the stage management course at the Central School of Speech and Drama. But he left after only a year to get proper backstage experience at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. In the mornings, he also cleaned the theatre to earn extra money.
I took great pride cleaning that theatre. The dress circle bar was my domain, and I used to very carefully polish all the brass and wash the glass.
So it must be rather nice for you to be back at Drury Lane with Miss Saigon.
It's like coming home. I've always had, that's the one dream I've had, was to have a show on at Drury Lane.
He did a variety of jobs backstage, including a spell up in the flies, hauling scenery up and down.
And as I undid the ropes, they caught round my hand, and I was flown. The weight of this huge piece of scenery took me right up to the grid, and it stopped literally 6 inches from the grid. I would have, only because it was a very tall piece of scenery that had landed on the stage, and they had to cut me down.
You know, people think it's pretty easy to be an impresario. Believe me, it ain't. It ain't easy at all.
Choreographers and directors always argue. The book writer tends to argue with the composer and lyricist. And it's very important to have a strong producer at the top, because in a sense, he is the one who has to balance all the elements and control all the elements.
I knew the moment I started to talk to Cameron in detail that there was a man after my own heart. He had just the same enthusiasm, just the same care, that it must be glamorous and beautifully done, that you don't save pennies on the costumes or save pennies on the scenery or something. You do it properly. You don't try and scrape into a smaller orchestra.
I'm not a great musician, though I can tell when the music's right or wrong. I can overlap into his area by sort of prodding him here and there and thinking, don't we need something like that, or is that mood right, or whatever, in his scoring.
Cameron is really much more of an old-fashioned producer in the sense that he does have strong creative views. Sometimes the team who he works with don't share them, but he has a very strong view on practically everything. In fact, one of his qualities is that, I mean, you could be 2 minutes into a song and he'll come up and say, I don't like that, it doesn't work, doesn't understand. You think, oh, Cameron, just wait a minute, let's get through to the end and we'll work it out.
Well, I can't help myself. I mean, I'm one of these people that just says what I feel, even if it isn't right. I just have to get it out of my system. But I've got a sort of, I sort of like a sort of terrible truffle hound, sort of smelling spots in the show which I don't think are right. And I just keep on and on and on until they just to shut me up. They'll go away and at least think about it.
He had one complete set of orchestrations made. And then he decided that he didn't like them. It wasn't right for the show. He got rid of that orchestrator and hired another orchestrator who then did 2 more dummy runs of orchestrations.
I had to scrap an entire concept album, which cost over £300,000, which went down the Swanee, but it was worth it in the end.
Have you ever seen a zebra and a giraffe in the jungle? I mean, they wanted to love people, but I have last year, and I can tell you.
To a certain extent, now we live in a world that's divided into 2. Stephen Sondheim gets all the critical acclaim, and the shows that Cameron Mackintosh and Andrew Lloyd Webber do are derided as tourist schlock. And producers' reigns as kings of the theatre coincide for the amount of time that the public's taste also happens to be the producer's taste. And when that changes, then no matter how successful you are, you go out the window. As has happened to David Merrick, as has happened to Harold Fielding, and which one day will happen to Cameron Mackintosh too.
One thing when I started off, I was given a book about Cochrane called The Showman Looks On. It's an autobiography, and one thing stuck early on in my life. It was his advice to aspiring young producers. He said, never put a show on for the audiences. Always put it on for yourself and do it as best as you can, and then maybe an audience will come and see it. And I think that's pretty good advice.
It's not just a West End phenomenon. It continues to be a box office hit around the globe. A staggering 56 million people have now seen Les Mis. That's almost the equivalent of every man, woman and child living in this country.
Michael Ball sings with Lea Salonga, but this is not a scene from their hit shows Phantom of the Opera or Miss Saigon. It's another hit both have shone in separately, Les Misérables. But everyone here's been very jolly because it's Les Mis' 10th birthday. And hundreds of the cast from its productions around the world are giving a gala concert on Sunday. But without props or costumes and new cast members, it can get confusing which way to go off stage. But everything should be smoothed out by Sunday, when thousands of adoring fans descend on the Albert Hall.
The seal of making this successful was the fact that it won Best Musical at the Laurence Olivier Awards in 1985. For them, that suddenly really had a bit of a clout, and suddenly people decided to take notice. It shot out of the Barbican and into the West End, where it's basically remained for the last 25 years. And when you think about it, it just goes to show that even though, people would say, oh no, the theme is not very good and it's not a warm sort of topic. Of course it's not. Victor Hugo wanted to get social injustice out there, and that's what he did. But the songs are so memorable, and they've been recorded from everyone, from the likes of Dame Shirley Bassey, right through to some of our most celebrated opera stars, including, of course, Luciano Pavarotti. But I think what really cemented it in the end was the fact that the public pushed this through. And as someone who attends many sort of opening nights in theatres, Les Mis fans are nothing like I've ever met before. They're very loyal. Some people, in fact, actually book the same seats every matinee and turn up week after week after week. They know the show backwards. They know everything about, when the lights should come on, the scene changes. If somebody's feeling ill in the cast, they become like friends. And one of the connecting factors that I think Victor Hugo would really love is the fact that, of course, the cast then connect with their fans, their audience, and that actually brings some sort of social connection. I'd like to think something that he really would admire.
Well, it started at the Royal Shakespeare Company, And the first performance was 5 hours long, and so they had to condense this amazing story into 3 hours. And in fact, they cut out a lot of fantastic things. There should be another show, Les Mis, the outcuts, or whatever you call it. So the Royal Shakespeare Company, we did it there for 8 weeks, and we had no idea it was going to transfer to the West End.
It's back to its roots, the Barbican Theatre, where it started 2.5 decades ago to some bad reviews and was just about to go to the West End.
Of course, we were all a bit depressed, having seen such a fantastic reception the night before. And so I thought I'll get rid of all the bad news at once and ring through the box office. And it took me several goes, and that was where the story came from. That they said, "How did you get through? We've had 5,000 calls. It's a record at the Barbican."
I mean, I knew it was going to be a big hit years ago, but I didn't know it was going to last 21 years. It's fantastic.
It's overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming, and I don't necessarily know that any of us truly understand the significance of it and ultimately and hopefully the impact.
It's actually quite fantastic though, because the piece is really about age and youth, and to think that I did it 21 years ago when I was the youngest adult, and now people are playing my role that weren't even born back then.
But it was really interesting because of Nick to see so many young people who probably have never seen a musical ever, you know, coming in tonight and being completely enthralled. I mean, you could hear a pin drop through the story, you know, and they just reacted to the show and the fact that he was incredibly good at it, as was Camilla, you know, on their baptism fire tonight. But I was really very happy.
It is nice being back on stage. I was Gavroche when I was in it last back in 2003, and about 7 years later I've come back to play Marius. And it's been a dream of mine for a long time, and to see it coming true is an amazing thing.
Nick's done a couple of shows on Broadway. I think he was in Beauty and the Beast, but the first time I met Nick was when he was the last Gavroche, which is the little kid in Les Misérables, on Broadway when I closed the show the first time after 18 years. And he did the last 9 months of the run. And I was reminded by his father that at the after-show party I'd gone up to him, and I obviously had a few drinks because I didn't remember, saying, you know, to Nick, you know, you are really terrific, and I hope when you're older you'll come back and see us for Marius. Well, even though I didn't remember it, he did, and out of the blue, I mean, I'd heard that he was interested in going to the theatre, so through another way I actually approached him, and then I spoke to his father, and he said, no, this is something they would really like to try and make happen. And it's a great credit to the family that they have moved heaven and earth to allow him to come and be here, and he's having a great time.
You know, I actually wasn't as nervous as I thought I would be. I don't think I was nervous at all. I think that I was really comfortable and just happy to be on that stage and really trying to become the character.
Well, what's interesting is that he's actually got a very mature voice for somebody who's still 17. You know, he's not quite 18 yet, and yet the voice sounds much older than you'd expect. And he's also got, I mean, a tremendous focus all the way through rehearsals. And when I first met him, I mean, he really, really knows what to go after. And he just does it with no problem, great ease, and the whole cast adore him.
The crowd was great tonight. So incredible to be back on the Les Mis stage. Obviously a bit of a different role this time, but still that same energy and that same excitement.
Tickets for the concert sold out in 2.5 hours. They'll have 17 different versions of the main character Valjean to choose from, and the comic relief of Alan Armstrong and Jenny Galloway.
How many thousands of people?
About 5.
About 5,000 people. And
Are you nervous?
no, no, not at all.
I think once you see all the people and know that everybody's rooting for you, and know that there's not a hostile soul in the stalls or in the or anywhere, it's just going to be fun.
You know, here and there I'm picking up the accent. I sing with one now in the show, which is kind of funny, but it's very, very interesting to be here and to pick up the lingo along the way and make some new friends as well, which has been great, and I'm really enjoying my stay.
They can come and see the show here in the morning at 10 o'clock. They can go to the matinee at the Queen's, and then the following day turn up with the other thousands and tens of thousands of people at the O2 for that extraordinary concert, which now has a cast of over 500.
Recently, they've started doing celebrity casting in Les Mis in London, and we've been lucky enough to see possibly some of our better greats, what I call the greats that are going to come forward in the next 10 years. The Lancashire tenor Alfie Boe has undertaken not just one but 3 stints in Les Mis and claims it's his very favourite role.
I've done the Les Misérables. I'm going to go back into Les Misérables this year in June to do a 6-month run. Wow. But I'm wanting to really break the genres a little bit, you know. People call it crossover, people call it all sorts of things, but I want to just break the genre and cross over to a new audience, not the repertoire so much, or sing different repertoire, but make sure it's legitimate for my voice, you know. Yeah. That I'm legitimate enough to sing it, you know, and still sing it in the same quality and the same standard that I would an operatic aria in a way.
The comedian Matt Lucas is possibly better known for shows like Little Britain and Come Fly With Me, and he virtually begged the producers, Cameron Mackintosh's company, for a part in the musical, which of course did nothing to dent the box office. It shot it through the roof, and it was like a new injection, if you like, of vitality, and once again, of course, making it one of the biggest take musicals of all time. Cameron himself said that, well, he's had many, many hits. He never thought that he would be known as the man who brought Les Mis to the British and Broadway public. But how lucky we are that he took that chance.
I mean, I was very lucky because they took me to Broadway as well, and every sort of musical performer wants to go to Broadway. So my dream came true when I was 21, which is amazing. And also my daughter, Eliza, also played Cosette at some point, and I went back into the show and I played the same role, Eponine, with her. So it's emotional for me. It's like it's my whole life. I mean, I think I have to be honest. You know, it's the best role I've ever played, and it did. You know, it gave me an incredible. Well, people still know me today from it, and the album is still selling that I made 21 years ago. So you know, for me, it's in the heart. It's really personal for me.
Now, amongst many of the awards that Les Misérables has picked up, this, to me, would be the biggest compliment. In 2004, Her Majesty the Queen asked the cast and everyone connected to the show to stage a very special version at Windsor Castle for then President Jacques Chirac. Now, can you imagine how nerve-wracking that must be, first of all? But apparently the Queen thought this was a great idea. It was an official visit. Lots of people were going to be invited. And apparently, sadly, there's no record. There's no recording of this particular night. I think that this really should have been recorded and taped because, you know, just to see our Queen enjoying this musical. And she's already been, we can tell you, unofficially many times to see this. It's one of her personal favourites.
You don't expect to win a Tony Award when you're that age. You've seen it on the TV, and suddenly you're told you're going to be up for one, and then you win it. It's just bizarre. I mean, I just thought, this is ridiculous. I'm here with all these stars that I've heard about, and you know, it's just amazing. And I used to sort of go, oh no, awards don't mean anything, but now I look at it and I'm quite proud.
Every year it picks up more and more awards. There was a special 10th anniversary show at the Royal Albert Hall. In a recent BBC radio poll, it was picked out as the best musical of all time. And it's hard to imagine that, you know, when he wrote it, whether he would have thought that his celebrity would have carried on. I think Victor Hugo would have thought he would have been known in his time, but his name is now plastered across the world. It's been seen in over 30 countries. It ran for over 10 years on Broadway. You know, when you think about it in those terms, you know, it is something of a phenomenon.
I'm just about to start on the film where we're now working on, somebody is working on the screenplay, and I'm doing it with Working Title, which is, you know, the great British company that's one of our best film company, and I'm really looking forward to finally getting Les Misérables out on the big screen.
Les Misérables, of course, is now a new smash hit mega movie, looking at all sorts of gold dust from BAFTAs to Globes to Oscars. But it's not the first time. There are already 10 silent versions made of this particular story. There's been a radio version, there's been a television version with Anthony Perkins, no less, which was kind of warmly received. It's one of those stories that time and time again people re-look at and think they can retell, but nobody really could have even predicted or had the slightest hint that the stage and Broadway version, the West End, should I say, Broadway version, would be so phenomenal. And of course, you know, when people said, first of all, when it opened in London, how could you possibly think you're going to have a smash hit with a title which is basically all about being miserable, Les Misérables? How wrong they were.
The film will actually use the music, the wonderful music from the show, but tell the story in cinematic terms. I mean, what we have here is a wonderful theatrical version, but you know, the cinema, we will reinvent it yet again to tell it for the cinema.
What was fantastic on this was the chance to reunite the original creative team that created the musical. So, you know, I wanted to create a new song for the film that was inspired by the novel, which talks about the extraordinary epiphany of what Jean Valjean has, when he feels this incredible love for this child that's come into his life. And so I asked Claude Michel Schoenberg and Alain Boublil if they could come up with a new song, and I had Claude Michel, Alain, and Herbie Kretzmann, the lyricist, you know, writing a new piece for me, and that was incredibly exciting to get to work with the original composer on the musical.
Russell, I'm Poppy. What a pleasure to meet you.
Cheers. What's your name?
Poppy.
Hi, Poppy. How are you?
I mean, the film was truly beautiful. I cried all the way through it. I loved it so much. Now, I would love to know, what was your first experience of Les Mis?
I saw it here in London, but I didn't see it until Cameron and Tom were already making the movie, and they talked to me about it, and so I was on my way to Italy, actually, for a friend's wedding. And so I stopped in to see it, and we had a couple of meetings about it.
What was the biggest challenge going into the part?
Well, I think the challenges actually unfolded as we went along, you know. It wasn't quite clear how challenging it was going to be at the beginning, because it's very easy to say, oh, and by the way, you're going to sing every take. But then the actual reality of doing that and the discipline that has to come into your life to keep yourself available every day and your voice available, you know. And Tom, as a director, is greedy, you know. He'll shoot and he'll shoot and he'll shoot, and you know. And every take we did was the full length of the song as well. So, yeah, I mean, you know, ultimately though, this was an incredibly enjoyable experience.
I grew up with my mom performing in the show in the first national tour. She understudied Fantine. So actually one of my first memories of seeing the show is seeing my mother play the part that I play in the film.
I saw it when I was beginning to think about making the film, and then I saw it 4 or 5 times. And what was extraordinary is after the second time, the melodies were just in my head, and that was it. I mean, for the last year and a half, they've just been going round and round and round. I mean, they were extraordinarily addictive.
Isabel Allen!
A year ago, she was performing on stage at school.
She's just so gorgeous. It was her first movie. She has no idea how brilliant she is. She's just so natural.
It may be a lot for a 10-year-old to take in, but Isabel looks set to walk many more red carpets in the future.
We did everything in one take. Yeah. Tom left a few of the songs, especially the solos, kind of in one long continuous take, or did very, very few cuts in it. But what he did was he filmed most of everything from a multi-camera approach, which meant that you could do a whole take knowing that the entire performance was captured, because it would have been very hard, I think, especially with the singing being live, to go from one take to another like an hour can change your voice, you know? It's the time of day, the barometer, there's so many factors. So Tom needed to be able to capture all of the performances live in order to edit in a way that wouldn't become distracting.
I didn't want to make the film if I didn't have my Jean Valjean, and Hugh came in and made me realise that I could make this film. I mean, because my shortlist was one person. I mean, who else can sing at that level, act in such an extraordinary way, is a bona fide film star in the old sense, could carry a film, has the requisite strength to play a famously strong man, but also has the grace and kind of spiritual gentleness that the character needs. It's Hugh Jackman.
Tom Hooper, first day rehearsal, said, I need you, actually before then, he said, I need you unrecognisable. He said, if people recognise you, I want them to think you're sick in real life, so I do my best.
He went on a really hardcore journey to try to physically capture what it'd be like to be a convict of 20 years standing. He lost 30 pounds of weight. You know, we shaved his head. I mean, we talk a lot about cutting Annie's hair, but Hugh Jackman's head was shaved very brutally, and then in the opening scene, I mean, this is where he's kind of quite eccentric. He went on a 36-hour water fast, which means no water for 36 hours, and then was willing to stand up to his chest in seawater, putting a massive ship in on a rope, so that his skin kind of went back against his cheeks, and you know. A lot of people don't recognise him in the opening scene. I mean, he's so kind of broken looking by this thing. I mean, and then when his character kind of flourishes, he then put on weight and changed again. And I mean, like, his commitment to this was total.
Yeah, my trainer on this movie, incredible guy David Kingsbury, has at one point in his life was a bodybuilder, and he knew of this water restriction thing, which is what bodybuilders do before a show, and you can lose up to 10 pounds of body weight, and right off the surface, do not do this at home, trust me. And so it really sinks in your chest. I was already quite skinny, but it makes it quite drastic. Your eyes get sunken. I look like hell, basically. And trust me, the headache after about 20 hours is something I don't want to repeat.
I was in Stratford doing Coriolanus, and I received a phone call from my agent telling me that I would be playing the eponymous hero Thénardier singing Master of the House.
Just like the singing, all the tears were done live. They weren't mine. I mean, I was definitely in a fragile place that day because my hair was going to be gone. But no, I really did try to kind of stay with Fantine. And Victor Hugo has this wonderful passage in the book where he talks about Fantine really didn't want to cut her hair, and how she receives a letter from the Thénardier saying that Cosette doesn't have a skirt for winter, she's going to be cold. And she sat there crumbling the letter in her hand for an entire day, and then just like around sunset goes down to the wig maker and says, take it, how much for it? He said 10 francs, and she says, cut it off then. And she sat there and trying to be stoic, thinking, I'm clothing my child with my hair. And I just kind of tried to bring some of that grace into it and not just have it all be about me.
For me, any physical transformation that you undergo is obviously going to be difficult, but I couldn't take it too seriously because it was my idea to lose my hair, and it was my idea to go to the extreme physical place that I did for this, and I did it for my job. And a lot of people don't have a choice about it. A lot of people get sick and they lose weight. They get sick and they have to lose their hair.
Tom Hooper, who's not a musical theatre director before, he went to see the show and really fell in love with it, and he said, how do I recreate that feeling that you get in the theatre? And so he wanted to sing live, and what he does actually is enhance the theatrical experience. For example, Anne Hathaway, her song, I Dreamed a Dream, which of course everybody feels they know, is a single shot without cutting for 3 minutes of her in close-up. It's one of the great performances ever given, and I think, and you never cut away from it. So it's like being in the theatre, but the best seat you couldn't even get that seat in the theatre. It's like sitting in her lap and listening to it, you know?
There wasn't anything about this job that wasn't daunting. I mean, we were all just kind of this mixture of anxiety and gratitude and excitement and nerves, and But, you know, and then of course you show up on set and you're just like, because we'd all been kind of working in our own lives on the music, and you show up and you hear Hugh Jackman, and of course we kind of all knew that Hugh could sing, but not like this. And then Eddie Redmayne with the most gorgeous voice just coming out of nowhere. So, I mean, so it was exciting to work with everybody, hear what they were doing, but I think, you know, hearing how talented everyone else was kind of pushed us all on to, me on at least.
So many auditions, 6 in total, 3 on tape, 3 in person, 2 flights to London.
You know, 60 million people have seen it around the world. Londoners have taken it to their hearts from the very beginning. I wanted to protect what it is people love about it and somehow take that and intensify it on the big screen. And I think it's how it makes people feel and how people go back and back to re-experience these strong emotions. I wanted to make the emotions they feel even more intense on the big screen.
I don't think I think about it in terms of hard or easy. It's just my job. So, you know, it's not like it all kind of, a feeling comes to you in one great moment. You're like, oh, I'm quite good at this, or oh, I'm terrible at this. You're so far removed from it, and at that point, I'd done so much preparation that I was so into it. It wasn't really about performing. It was more about just honoring what I had learned in the research that I had done, and just trying to open myself wide enough to let all that come out.
Really amazing to be up there. It's so cool.
Well, it's Jean Valjean. For actors, it's a bit like a Hamlet or something. It is the kind of role you dream of playing and also secretly terrified of playing, because it requires everything of you. And with Jean Valjean, emotionally, physically and vocally, every day it requires it, usually all at the same time. So it was an incredible opportunity, and I'm just so lucky to have been working with Tom Hooper and these other great actors.
You know, I used to go to the Empire Leicester Square and the Odeon Leicester Square as a kid, and dream of one day having a film maybe in those cinemas. And I remember the ritual as I left, I'd always turn back and watch the end credits roll and make a kind of commitment to myself to try to get a film on one of those screens. And to have both screens of the premiere last night with 3,000 people was a kind of great, I don't know, homecoming for me as a Londoner to have that opportunity.
You know, he would have everyone over when we were in London, and it was great because he had a very, very great, you know, estate over there, and it was a lot of fun, and it was nice after long weeks for everyone to come together and do that, and he's just a great guy.
At the beginning, it's a very embarrassing thing to actually sing to people. It's a very exposing thing to be like, hey, you know, on set. And so when you were allowed to get so relaxed around each other and learn to, and you didn't feel awkward.
There have been subsequently some wild singing parties. We were down in a pub in New York the other day, and Russell's mate with a guitar, and we were all singing songs. I've never quite got over the fear factor of it, but it is quite entertaining.
Do you know what? I feel so proud to be a part of this. It was so odd. Last night we had the premiere, and we ended up driving back to it. There was a party afterwards, and we sort of drove through Leicester Square and up Shaftesbury Avenue and past where Les Mis is on, and there in the Palace Theatre where it used to play. I have so many memories as a kid of walking up and down those theatres, wanting to, you know, maybe be an actor, but it never was in my wildest dreams that I'd get to be a part of it. So yeah, I feel very privileged.
Dream to dream, and it came true. Oh,
Yeah.
so cheesy.
Yeah, that was, but it was. It may not have been the first person to say.
See, Russell loves a sing-along, and if you ever get invited to his place for a party, Lucrezia,
yeah, I'm sure.
right after you do David Letterman, then make sure you take a song, because he gets everyone singing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it was a great way to let off steam. I mean, we were all, you were not allowed to sing any of your songs from your repertoire in the musical. That was the only rule.
It's, you know, it's easy to see why Eponine loves Marius when he looks like Eddie Redmayne, you know? But then equally it's easy to see why he loves Cosette when it's Amanda Seyfried, to be fair.
Yeah, no, there was a lot. But the thing about this film is, because I'm embarrassed to admit it, but we were all such sort of aggressive Les Mis fans that it's the first film I've seen when people would come into set on their days off to kind of see how everyone was doing. 'Cause no one wanted to miss out. So yeah, we were all very supportive.
Well, I think it's, you know, I've always admired Hugh Jackman. I've always respected his career and his work. I think he's just got a fantastic range in what he does. I just think the world of him professionally. And so then, you know, I was thinking, well, no, you know, when you meet someone who's almost like an idol and you think, well, they're never going to match that expectation. Well, here's the thing with Hugh Jackman. He didn't match it. He raised it. I just didn't think somebody could be so cool with all the success he's had to be the most level-headed person. He is so calm on set. He's like, hi, and he's lovely. And then it's like, action, and this like character bursts out of his soul, and it's like, wow. And for me, that's inspiring at the beginning of my career to meet somebody like that who's got that perfect balance. I look at, you know, he's inspiring to me, definitely.
I spent the most time with Eddie, I think, yes.
And who did you bond with the most, would you say?
I guess Eddie. I guess I bonded, no, I don't know. Yeah, I guess Eddie. For the most part, I bonded with Eddie and Samantha. But we all kind of had, I mean, we all had scenes together. And throughout rehearsal, we were able to kind of get to know each other and bond through like the terror of singing live, and also the fact that we were all major Les Mis fans, and the fact that we all worked like our asses off to get the roles. So, but I guess I spent the most time with Eddie and Samantha, and it was a nice little group.
I think it was just the difference in how you convey this emotion. I think in a theatre you're projecting to 2,000 seats and everything's heightened because there's no point in having a little private moment on stage. You need people to connect with that story and to sort of feel what your character's feeling. And on screen the camera's so close to you that you feel, you know, it's so intimate, you can be more truthful, and that realism is amazing. But then you can't beat that live buzz of theatre. So what I feel is exciting about this project, certainly from an acting point of view, is combining those two together. So it's kind of that utter realism of film, but with that kind of live buzz you get in theatre. It's combining the two to create something that feels unique.
I had to sing. Just had to sing. I was completely out of my comfort zone and, you know, very, very insecure about my voice. I definitely wish I'd had more time to prepare this soprano technique, but, you know, I did my best, and I feel like, you know, this is the kind of, it's just a unique experience, and the opportunity's not gonna come around very often, so I definitely think this is, you know, the coolest thing I've ever done.
Well, I didn't get a call. That was the first step. Basically, I was performing as Nancy and Oliver on stage, and Cameron McIntosh, the producer, walked on and announced to a live audience, that I was going to be playing Eponine Les Mis. That was my face, right there. That was my reaction. And it's on YouTube. I've watched it since because I can't remember it. I just remember hearing Eponine, and I remember my heart nearly falling out of my chest and going, because I've never wanted anything more. I'd never wanted this. It's been a part of my life for 4 years. It's a character that I feel so passionate about, and oh gosh, and to get that news in that way, that was my reaction right there. You did a really good impression of me.
It was like my inner, you know, teenager who grew up with Ali G and, you know, all those things. I was properly starstruck by Sacha, and he arrived on set at a point that he and Helena Bonham Carter arrived at a point in which we've been going through this rigorous, quite sort of intense process forever. And they arrived, and this sort of lightness arrived, and it made me very happy. It was just, that was a bit of a sort of lifetime aspiration, I never thought I'd get the opportunity to work with him, but it was pretty wonderful to do.
I think I was excited about, although it was a world I knew nothing about, at least I knew this girl, I knew this piece, I felt so passionately about it. So that was the one comforting thing I think about entering it. I wanted to work with these actors that I'd, you know, admired for years, people like Hugh Jackman, you know, and Eddie Redmayne I knew had been cast as Marius, and when I was auditioning for Eponine, there was posters everywhere with my week with Marilyn, and I was like, remember just being like positive thinking he could be my Marius, and working with people like that, that was such a highlight.
I was lucky enough to attend many of these gala nights of Les Mis, and they've always been magical. You know, any musical that celebrates a particular milestone is always sort of like one of those moments where you think, it's been going so long, can they really inject something into that? And it does have that magical touch. I think what's also interesting is the fact that as somebody who's seen it, as I say, quite a few times now, you go along and each time there's always something that you don't quite remember from the first time or the second time. And you do come away, it's what they call, one of those musicals, it's what they call a memorable musical, not just because of the story, but particularly with the songs. You do go out and days later you've got this fantastic melody in your head and you're thinking to yourself, what is that? What is that? Because with a lot of songs from musicals, you don't always know the title, but you only have to hear the sort of the words of On My Own, and it strikes a chord through any generation. And I do kind of think that that's why it's been covered by so many people. So many people resonate with the lyrics and the beautiful melody of many of the songs from the score of Les Mis, and I think it will go on for many, many years in people's minds.